He says it's all about power and violence. Let's actually look at how people keep the peace.
What do you mean by force? Are we just talking about like violence?
If you have a society in which people have any sort, if you have any sort of laws or you have any sort of rights at all, then
Well, I agree
the
with you that
only
laws do.
the only thing which would create a prevention of the violation of said thing by a person would be the requirement of force.
This is circular reasoning. Assuming that only force stops violations, then repeating it as proof, begging the question that conclusion only force works is baked into the premise.
So if I
I
want,
mean, I don't know how force prevents rights violations necessarily in
it's the
this
only
instance.
thing that prevents rights violation.
Oversimplification erases social stigma, reputation, courts, diplomacy, insurance, etc.
Well, if you're saying men have the monopoly on force and that's instilled within patriarchy, then why do rights violations occur?
Well, no, that doesn't even follow. It would just follow that men are the only ones who could stop rights violations.
And here he's just dodging it, never answers why the monopoly still allows violations, just relabels men as both arsonists and firefighters.
But I don't think society is intrinsically and implicitly governed by force. And I think advocating for that
Which
is
part
creating
of society?
vi-
Which part of society is not governed by force? Which part?
I mean, schools aren't governed by
Yes,
force.
they're
People go
governed
to
by
school
force for
because
sure.
Really? So kids go to school because they're afraid they're going to get.
No, they're not going to
hurt and
school
beat
because
up
they're
and
afraid they're going to get hurt. But there's security guards who are around. There's police officers who are around. There's people who enable that nothing bad's going to happen to those kids. There's teachers who are there much stronger than the students to keep potential threats away from the students. All of it's governed by force.
Cherry picking security staff, he points to the fact that there are security guards or police somewhere in the background and uses that to claim that every peaceful rule is actually enforced by violence. And that's ignoring the real difference between having backup just in case and living under constant threat. In this false dilemma, he acts like there are only two choices: pure violence or no order at all. That's ignoring all the ways society runs like cooperation, trust, and shared rules without force. And we have an equivocation on governed. He keeps using the word governed to mean ruled by threat every time, even when it just means organized by rules in normal situations. And here her point stands. Her argument that people mostly follow norms and rules because of agreement, not fear, still makes sense and isn't really answered.
Are institutions that we've created, right?
It's
And
used
the
for
more advanced countries, the ones that
use force.
respect human rights, are not the ones that are really enforcing it.
Those use force. Those all those institutions you just said, they are all use force. Every single one of them uses force.
There's an equivocation here on force. He lumps together things like voting, making laws, and even courtroom decisions with physical violence as if they're all the same kind of force. They're not. In another false dilemma, he frames it as either it's male violence or rights don't exist, ignoring that we have rule of law as a real nonviolent option.
So,
Everyone.
any woman in Congress or the Supreme Court has more power than you ever have.
No,
right?
they don't. They only have the power of enforcement.
Every three. My question to you is, if right now you wanted to give rights to preborn babies, how would you go about doing that?
Right now, me personally, I would use a legislative process. However, I would also lobby for a collective of men. And this is what I do now. The more that you lobby for that collective of men, ultimately you'll be able to consolidate power based on the fact that ultimate force could be used if necessary.
This is a category error. He mixes up using the legal process, which is about rules and procedures, with just using raw power. And that's ignoring the difference between fair systems and brute force.
Yes. Okay. But wouldn't it be better for us to have a law and force saying if you do this, there's going to be severe punishments for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the social norm itself is not the enforcement. It's always the force.
A false dichotomy. He pretends you have to choose between only social norms or only force, when in reality, laws and norms work together. Laws come from shared values, and norms often keep things peaceful without anybody using force.
Okay, so women's rights are laughable because men, if needed, can use enforcement mechanisms, whether legally or just purely physically, to overpower them. Are children's rights also then laughable?
Hang on, back
because
up.
parents can use
Because
authority
you're actually straw manning, right? Remember, I
Okay,
said the word
sorry.
egalitarianism, meaning equality. Equality is laughable, not women's rights, not giving rights to women, in other words. But egalitarianism and equality is laughable because it's paradoxical. And the great paradox of it is that you would be appealing to the same group of people who can then take your rights away while at the same time considering yourself equal to those people. It's laughable. It's a paradox.
He never answers how rights are protected, so he avoids talking about how courts, laws, and social norms actually protect rights. Instead, he just calls equality a paradox and never deals with the real ways that rights are secured in society. There's a black and white fallacy here. He acts like your only options are perfect self-defense or zero rights, and that's ignoring the reality. Laws and courts create a middle ground, and there people can have rights and protection without the brute strength. And there's a straw man right here. He twists up on his argument to make it sound silly or impossible, turning the debate into an all or nothing instead of what was actually said.
Or enable a government to use force in order to make sure people had due process.
Due process is something that we put into place as a law because it was voted on by the people.
Yeah, but it's still a social
Christian
construct.
doctrine is not voted on by the people.
Let's say that people voted on it then.
That would be okay.
Then it's fine?
Yes.
Even though it's not true?
Correct.
Yeah, but voting in democracy and the idea of democracy, that's just an arbitrary social construct as well.
So are you a communist?
No.
He waves off democracy and due process as just made up rules, but then still wants to enforce those rules with cops and courts. So he's not being consistent. And he's also self-undermining. If all civic norms are fake social constructs, then he loses any solid reason to enforce any rule. He's undercutting his own argument here. We have a performative contradiction. He relies on the very systems like laws, democracy, and courts that he's calling arbitrary and meaningless. He's using what he claims is worthless as the basis for his position.
But we have these social constructs, and then we adhere to them. So we can have the conversation that it would be wrong for us to punch each other here because we are here for a debate where we have established that we want to talk about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
exactly. So what?
So I'm saying if you're appealing to,
if you decided that you actually didn't want to do that and you did want to punch me, there's nothing I could do to stop you. So
no, there is. You could use force.
I mean, I'm a little dude. So.
But the point is like you can use force, whether you're a little dude or a big dude or.
But I'm saying outside of that, I agree with you.
So there is no outside of that.
And we have fatalism here. He insists that at the end of the day, everything is just about physical force. He refuses to accept that mutual agreements, social norms, or laws have any real power on their own. He reduces all social order to force or nothing, and that's ignoring how nonviolent rules and agreements actually work in real life.
Right. I agree with you. That's why I'm not understanding why this is
because what I'm saying is that for when atheists say Christians shouldn't be in power because of my rights, what they're really saying is Christians shouldn't be in power because we will use force for this arbitrary made up bullshit that we like, and we don't want them to do anything about it. So if that is the case, then in the reverse, we can appeal to the same thing.
So to Koki, Andrew dodges the norm court law argument by simply saying both sides are arbitrary and use force for their own bullshit. He doesn't engage with the substance of norms. He just says, well, you do it too. Andrew keeps saying force is the foundation of everything.
The first truth, as I have often argued, is that absent enforcement, society fails to function. Force being the ultimate arbiter of dispute, and will always be. We both appeal to physical force. What else could we ever appeal to?
Appeal to for what? For
any ought. Every ought would just become force. You would just say that the things I want to see different in the world are because I want to see them different in the world. And then that would require force. So relativism will reduce to a force doctrine.
But in this other interview with Crowder, he admits you don't actually need violence at all.
Been kind of led to believe that bottom-up propaganda is the way, that it needs to be organic. No, it doesn't. You need top-down propaganda like you had in World War II. The same way you got women in the factories with Rosie the Riveter is the same way you get them in the household with Susan the housewife, right?
Here he's just straight up saying you can reshape society just by telling people a story over and over. This is not by beating them or threatening them, but just bombarding them with narrative until it sticks. So if force was all that mattered, none of this soft brainwashing would even work. This is literally social engineering without violence, meaning rights and roles get manufactured and maintained by ideas, not by who's holding the club.
And that's the propaganda that's everywhere. The glorification is of Susan the housewife, you know what I mean? Who has the little like thing of cookies and she's always smiling and she's always super happy and her husband's always, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you make that the trend everywhere and you force it down everybody's throat all day long, every day, where it becomes practically ingratiated in them. That's what you elevate in society. You don't even have to outlaw anything. It's not even necessary. Like, you don't even have to be like, well, you can't, do X behavior. If you had a glorification program top down, just like you do for government propaganda and warfare, it would work beautifully.
He admits that you can control behavior and set norms without any laws or threats. Just glorify what you want to see and people fall in line. So what does it say about force? It means that force, as in, violence or coercion kind of way, which is how he's describing all the time. That means force isn't the actual engine behind rights or social order. He's talking about control through soft power. The whole without force you have no rights idea, it falls apart right here. He's literally saying you don't need force, just a big enough marketing campaign.
It would work beautifully. You don't even need to tell women they can't go to college. You just make the propaganda all about the family unit. And that's the thing the government's supporting. That's the thing we're pushing for as a society. That's the patriotic thing to do.
He's bragging about being able to change what people do without threats, violence, or even bans, just propaganda. So if you can move the population to do what you want without violence or threat of violence, then rights and roles clearly come from more than just who can physically dominate. That's a complete contradiction of force doctrine.
The first one's much more easy to demonstrate and prove because we have 200 years of propaganda from the top down, which shows Philip Morris can definitely get the country to smoke, okay?
Yes.
We can definitely prove that propaganda works.
And he's referencing little history, mass behavior changed by persuasion, not policing, tobacco, war, and gender roles, all shaped by mass messaging. This is not about who has the biggest stick. So if force doctrine was right, none of these big shifts would be possible without a cop behind every corner. But people change en masse because of ideas, not violence.
You force it down everybody's throat all day long, every day, where it becomes practically ingratiated in them. That's what you elevate in society. You don't even have to outlaw anything. It's not even necessary.
And again, he's admitting social control is possible without any force, just repetition and approval. If rights can exist, be taken, or be expanded purely by propaganda, then force isn't the foundation of rights. Belief is. This just torpedoes the idea that without force you have no rights.
The
true for me, but not for
the idea for the propaganda though that worked was that a lot of people were like they had an aversion to drug use, but what it did was it created a culture where people who did it were considered nefarious. They were considered like, you need to be away from me. You're part of like a more nefarious crowd, a bad crowd, right?
Yeah.
And you need to be over there. Well, that's what reinforcement of virtue really is.
Again, this is soft power, not force. Rights aren't just about who can overpower whom, but about who can shape what's considered good or bad.
It's like, you can't tell me it doesn't work because, man, all I've ever seen is these programs work.
Yeah.
To huge success.
He just says it outright. Propaganda works, always has. If you can shape society without ever pulling a gun or swinging a club, then rights and social order don't come from force alone. Every time he pushes propaganda as the real driver for social change, he's contradicting his own force doctrine. He's showing that ideas, not violence, run the world, and that rights, norms, and even who's in charge can be set without force. If you can control people with memes and messaging, then force is not the base layer. Most people don't follow the law because they're afraid of violence or punishment. It's way more about social norms, reputation, culture, and sometimes propaganda. You don't need laws, bans, or threats. Just push an idea and glorify it. Force is the only foundation of social order and rights. Propaganda wouldn't work unless backed by actual threat of violence. He explicitly says you don't even have to outlaw anything, and it would work beautifully just with social messaging and glorification. This is non-violent cultural influence. This is not force. And he can't have it both ways. If everything is force, then propaganda should be powerless. If propaganda works, which he says it does, then society is run by more than force. He just debunks his own doctrine.
The exception's what proves the rule, right?
Right.
That's what proves the rule. It's like, because you have to point to an exception, you're saying there's a rule.
But using violence as the backup plan is the exception, not the everyday reality. So by his own logic, the whole force doctrine falls apart. And It's not just cops and the government who enforce norms. Social pressure comes from everywhere, and in a lot of cases, women are actually the main enforcers. Moms, teachers, friends, or even random people online keep things in line by setting what's seen as normal. So when you put it all together, it's not force that runs society, it's trust, culture, habit, and yeah, sometimes propaganda.